Alright, this is your video lesson over Unit 24, Part 1, which is going to discuss biological classification and taxonomy, how we classify living organisms and name them using the set of rules that scientists have developed over many years. Make sure you're taking these notes down in your journal and that you get these checked off at the end of the video. To begin with, let's start with an activity. So I want you to first by yourself. I want you to pause the video, and I want you to organize the office supplies that I have listed based on their similarities and differences. So I want you to try and sort them into at least 2 groups, if not more, if you can do so. So pause the video and sort these by yourself. Okay, so first of all, let's try and separate them into 2 separate groups. So you probably would have noticed that we have 2 very different types of things here. We have some things that are used to attach or connect things, and then we have other things that are used to write on or color. So let's go ahead and sort those based on those 2 groups. So in our first group, we're going to have, we'll just say attach. And in the other group, we will have write. Alright, so in our attached group, we're going to have our glue, our tape, and our paper clip. In our writing group, we're going to have our pen, marker, and crayon. Okay, so those are our first 2 groups. Now let's see if we can divide each of those groups into smaller groups within themselves. So within our attached group, let's see if we can divide this into 2 separate groups. We see that glue and tape are different from paper clips, and that glue and tape both have a sticky adhesive. So we will say adhesive can be one group, and non-adhesive could be our other group. And we would have our glue and tape in our adhesive group, and our paper clip would be over here with the non-adhesives. We'll do the same thing in our writing group. In the writing group, we can separate that into 2 smaller subgroups. We could say one that's used to color and one that you don't use to color. And so in the color group, we would have marker and crayon. And in not color, we would have our pen. Okay, so we can continue to break these down to even smaller subgroups. And this is the premise of what we're doing when we're classifying biological organisms. We're starting off with broad categories, and we're narrowing it down over and over again. So why do we need to do classification? Why do we need classification? Aristotle is the first person recorded to actually have been trying to classify organisms. So as he observed the world around him, he tried to start figuring out how everything fit together and how everything was related. Now, many years later, hundreds of years later actually, a man named Carolus Linnaeus actually developed the biological classification system that we use today. And so he figured out a way to name organisms as well as classify them into different groups. Right? He actually came up with a naming system that we're going to talk about a little bit later in this video. And that 2-word naming system that we use to name organisms is called binomial nomenclature. So that's the 2-word naming system that he developed, and we will talk about that in a little bit. Make sure you write down everything that you see on this screen. Alright, so how exactly does taxonomy and classification work? So Linnaeus is using similarities in organisms to classify them. So those with the most similarities are going to be the most closely related. So as we go from a broad group and we narrow it down smaller and smaller, the smaller you get, the more in common those organisms are going to have with each other. We call this the study of taxonomy. Taxonomy is the practice of naming and organizing organisms. And like I've said, we're going to organize these organisms into large groups and divide those into subgroups based on what those organisms have in common. All right, so for an example, the example I like to use is to think about when we are narrowing it down to where we live. So all of us live in the country, the United States of America, okay? That is our country. Above that, we live in North America. And above that, we live in the world, right? So you can start off in broad categories and narrow it down. So we live in the country of the United States of America. Within the United States, we are in a subgroup called the state of Texas. That's the state where we live. Within the state of Texas, we live in another subgroup, a smaller group called a region, and we live in East Texas. Within East Texas, we live in Smith County. Within Smith County, you live in White House, the city of White House. And if we're talking about the school, we are located on Main Street. So we have started off broad and narrowed it down smaller and smaller and smaller. And that is what we are doing in taxonomy. All right, we have a specific order of classification, and you will have to have this memorized. So we will start off. The broadest category is domain. There are 3 domains. Within each domain, within the domains, we divide those into kingdoms. Each kingdom is divided into a phylum, or different phylums. Phylums are divided into orders. Orders are divided into hold on. Okay, so I erased it and we're going to start over. We're going to, I want you to draw an upside down triangle, and that way we can see how they go from broad category to a more specific category. So again, our broadest category is domain. Within the domains, we find our kingdoms. Within our kingdoms, we find our phylums. Within the phylums, we get our classes. It's our class. Within our classes, we find the orders. Within the orders, we get our families. Within the family, we get the genus. And within the genus, we find the specific species. Right? So you need to be able to memorize the order of this. And so there's a mnemonic that will help you do this. And I think of it this way. I remember it as Dear King Philip came over for good soup. So this is a mnemonic that I use to help myself remember the order in which these go in. Feel free to develop your own mnemonic that can help you remember the order, but just make sure you end up knowing the order of classification. You will be expected to know that and have it memorized. All right, so let's look at the orders of classification for some different organisms. So the first one I have listed here for you is the human classification. We are, all of these organisms, if I had written the domain, all of the organisms would be in domain Eukarya, because we are all made up of eukaryotic cells. So there are 3 domains, archaea, bacteria, and eukarya, and us and all other organisms that we can see with our eyes are in eukarya. Right, we have 6 different kingdoms, which we're going to have a whole video lesson on the different kingdoms. The examples I've given you here all are part of kingdom Animalia, because I want you to look and compare and see how they are similar and when they start becoming different. So if we look at the first row, it's easy to see that all of these organisms I've listed, from humans, lions, tigers, to our pintail duck, we all fall into the kingdom of Animalia. Okay. After that, we look at our phylum, and this is our subcategory of our kingdom, and you see that all of these, from humans, lions, tigers, and pin-tailed duck, were all in the phylum of Chordata. In our classes, we see that humans, lions, and tigers are all in Mammalia, class Mammalia. We're all mammals. But our duck is now in a different class. It's in the Aves. So that means that the human, lion, and tiger are more closely related than the pin-tailed, than any of them are to the pin-tailed duck. If we keep on continuing further, we see the human now is in the order of primate. The lion and the tiger are both in Carnivora, and the pin-tailed duck is in the order of Anseriformes. And if we continue on further, we can see that the human and the duck are now in completely different pathways. But if we look at the lion and tiger, we go to the next one, we see the family. They are both, again, in the same family of the Felidae family. They are both in the same genus of Panthera. And so the only difference is the species name. The lion is in the species Leo, and the tiger is in Tigris. So the lion and tiger actually are very closely related, and that's why they have all of the same categories until you get to the very, very end, and the only thing they're different in is in the species. Okay? So when we name an organism using binomial nomenclature, you are actually going to use the genus and the species. Right? So the genus is our first word of our name. The species is the second part of the name. And the genus and species, they're usually going to be either in Greek or Latin. They're not typically English words. When we write these, we're always going to write it italicized, which means slanted, or you can underline it. And you always capitalize the genus, but not the species. Okay, so for example, if we were going to write the name of a lion, we would say it is Panthera Leo. And if we were writing this, we would, typing it, we would italicize it. If we wanted to abbreviate it, we could abbreviate it by simply writing the first letter of the genus and then writing the species name, right? Our species name is the most specific, which tells us exactly which organism we are talking about. Alright, so that's the end of our video over biological classification and naming organisms. Make sure you've completed all these notes, have them written down in your journal, and you get them checked off, and then continue on to the next activity.